The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds of Gatcombe Park as Zara Tindall adjusted her riding helmet, preparing for what she believed would be another ordinary training session. Her husband Mike watched from the stable entrance, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by an unusual tension that had been building for weeks. The former England rugby captain had always prided himself on being straightforward, but recent developments within the royal family had left him questioning everything he thought he knew about his place in the monarchy. Mike Tindall had married into one of the world's most scrutinized families in 2011, and over the years, he had carved out a comfortable niche as the down-to-earth sportsman who brought humor and authenticity to royal gatherings. His relationship with various family members had always been cordial, particularly with Princess Anne, his mother-in-law, who appreciated his no-nonsense approach to life. However, something had shifted dramatically in recent months, and Mike could feel the change in every interaction, every glance, every carefully worded conversation. The trouble had begun 3 months earlier, when Prince Edward, youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II, had commissioned a comprehensive review of royal inheritance protocols. What started as a routine administrative exercise had uncovered several historical documents that cast new light on ancient customs and traditions governing royal family membership. Edward, known for his meticulous attention to detail and his desire to modernize royal operations, had insisted on examining every aspect of how the family's inner circle was defined and maintained. During one of these investigative sessions, Edward's legal team had discovered a series of documents dating back several centuries that outlined specific criteria for maintaining close relationships with working royals. These documents, which had been largely forgotten in the royal archives, contained detailed provisions about marriage partnerships and their long-term sustainability within the royal framework. The findings were not immediately concerning, but they raised questions about how modern relationships fit within these historical guidelines. Mike had first learned about the investigation during a casual conversation with Prince William at a family gathering. William had mentioned Edward's project in passing, noting how thorough and comprehensive the research had become. At the time, Mike had thought little of it, assuming it was another one of Edward's many attempts to streamline royal operations. However, as weeks passed, Mike began noticing subtle changes in how family members interacted with him during official events and private gatherings. The first clear sign that something was wrong came during a private dinner at Windsor Castle. Mike had been seated further from the main family table than usual, a placement that might seem insignificant to outsiders, but carried deep meaning within royal protocol. Zara had noticed the change immediately and questioned her mother about it later that evening. Princess Anne's response had been diplomatically vague, mentioning ongoing reviews and temporary adjustments without providing specific details. As the investigation continued, Mike found himself gradually excluded from certain family discussions and decision-making processes. Invitations to informal gatherings became less frequent, and when he did attend official functions, he noticed palace staff treating him with a different level of formality than before. The change was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who had spent over a decade navigating royal family dynamics. Zara, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the full scope of what was happening. Her focus had been consumed by preparations for upcoming equestrian competitions and her responsibilities as a mother to their 3 children. She noticed her husband's growing unease but attributed it to work stress and the natural pressures that came with balancing family life with their various professional commitments. Mike, protective of his wife and reluctant to burden her with concerns that might prove unfounded, chose to keep his observations to himself. The situation reached a critical point when Mike received an unexpected request to meet with Edward privately. The meeting, scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at Buckingham Palace, was presented as a routine discussion about family matters. However, Mike sensed that this conversation would be far more significant than the casual tone of the invitation suggested. As he prepared for the meeting, he reflected on his journey from professional rugby player to royal family member, wondering if that journey was about to take an unexpected turn. Prince Edward's office, located in one of the palace's more modest wings, reflected his practical approach to royal duties. The room was efficiently organized, with neat stacks of documents and several computer monitors displaying various royal family charts and organizational diagrams. When Mike arrived, Edward greeted him with his characteristic politeness, but there was an underlying seriousness that immediately confirmed Mike's suspicions about the meeting's importance. The conversation began with pleasantries about family life and recent rugby matches. But Edward quickly steered the discussion toward more serious matters. He explained that his inheritance review had uncovered several historical precedents and protocols that needed to be considered in light of modern family circumstances. While he emphasized that these were merely administrative considerations, Mike could sense that the implications were far more serious than Edward's diplomatic language suggested. As the meeting progressed, Mike realized that his position within the royal family was being fundamentally reevaluated. The historical documents Edward referenced seemed to suggest that certain types of relationships required ongoing assessment to ensure they continued to serve the monarchy's best interests. While Edward was careful not to make any direct accusations or statements, the subtext was clear. Mike's role within the family circle was under scrutiny. Significant changes might be necessary. The documents Edward presented during their private meeting were copies of original manuscripts that had been carefully preserved in the royal archives for centuries. These historical papers outlined complex protocols governing family relationships and contained specific language about marriage partnerships that could be deemed incompatible with royal service under certain circumstances. Mike studied the yellowed pages with growing concern, trying to understand how centuries-old customs could suddenly threaten his modern marriage and family life. Edward explained that the documents referenced a concept known as beneficial alignment, which essentially meant that all relationships within the royal circle needed to actively contribute to the monarchy's stability and public image. While Mike had always believed his marriage to Zara was purely a personal matter, these historical precedents suggested that royal marriages were evaluated based on their ongoing value to the institution. The discovery of these protocols had prompted Edward to conduct a comprehensive review of all current family relationships. According to Edward's research, Mike's background as a professional rugby player had initially been viewed favorably because it brought positive attention to the royal family and demonstrated their connection to British sporting culture. However, recent public incidents and media coverage had begun to raise questions about whether this relationship continued to serve the monarchy's best interests. Edward cited several specific examples, including Mike's candid comments on his podcast about royal family life and his occasional public appearances, that some advisors felt were too informal for royal standards. The conversation took an even more serious turn when Edward mentioned concerns raised by senior palace advisors about Mike's influence on family dynamics. Some officials had observed that Mike's relaxed approach to royal protocol, while initially refreshing, had begun to encourage similar behavior among other family members. This trend toward informality was seen as potentially damaging to the monarchy's traditional image and authority, particularly during a time when public support for royal institutions faced ongoing challenges. Mike listened carefully as Edward outlined the specific findings that had led to these concerns. The review had identified several instances where Mike's presence at official events had resulted in breaches of established protocol, though these incidents had been minor and largely overlooked at the time. However, when viewed collectively, palace advisors argued that these small violations represented a pattern of disregard for royal traditions that could undermine the institution's credibility, the most damaging finding involved Mike's relationship with certain media outlets and his willingness to share personal details about royal family life. While his comments had generally been positive and harmless, palace officials worried about the precedent this openness might set for other family members. The monarchy's traditional approach to media relations emphasized careful control of information, and Mike's more casual attitude toward privacy represented a potential security risk for the entire family. Edward was careful to emphasize that no final decisions had been made and that the review process was still ongoing. However, he wanted Mike to understand the seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences if the concerns could not be adequately addressed. The historical precedents suggested several possible outcomes, ranging from modified roles within the family structure to more significant changes in official recognition and access to royal privileges. As the meeting continued, Mike began to understand that his casual approach to royal life, which had made him popular with the public and endearing to family members, was now being viewed as a liability by palace officials. His authentic personality and willingness to speak openly about his experiences had initially been seen as assets that humanized the royal family. However, changing political climates and increased scrutiny of royal activities had shifted institutional priorities toward greater control and traditional formality. The discussion revealed that Zara's position within the family was also being carefully evaluated. Though her status as Princess Anne's daughter provided her with certain protections that Mike did not enjoy, palace advisors had noted that Zara's career as an equestrian athlete had brought positive attention to the royal family, and her dedication to her sport was seen as embodying values that aligned well with royal traditions of excellence and service. However, concerns had been raised about how Mike's potential removal from royal circles might affect Zara's own relationship with the family. Some officials worried that forcing Zara to choose between her husband and her royal connections could create a public relations crisis that would damage the monarchy's reputation. This consideration had led to discussions about alternative approaches that might address the concerns about Mike while preserving Zara's position within the family structure. Edward explained that one possible solution involved restructuring Mike's role to minimize his involvement in official royal functions while allowing him to maintain his marriage and family relationships. This approach would essentially create a separation between Mike's personal life with Zara and his public association with the royal family. While this solution might address palace concerns about protocol and media relations, it would fundamentally change the nature of Mike's relationship with the institution he had served for over a decade. The meeting concluded with Edward requesting that Mike consider these findings carefully and prepare for additional discussions in the coming weeks. Palace officials wanted to explore all possible solutions before making any final decisions. But Edward emphasized that some form of change would be necessary to address the concerns raised by the inheritance review. Mike left the meeting feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation and uncertain about how to proceed without jeopardizing his family's future. During the drive home to Gatcombe Park, Mike struggled with whether and how to share this information with Zara. He knew that keeping such significant news from his wife would be unfair and potentially damaging to their relationship. But he also worried about the impact this revelation might have on her emotional well-being and her own relationship with her family. The weight of these concerns made the journey seem longer than usual. Mike found himself questioning every decision that had led to this moment of crisis. That evening, Mike sat in the quiet comfort of their family's sitting room, watching Zara help their youngest daughter with homework while their other children played nearby. The domestic tranquility felt precious and fragile as he considered how to share the devastating news from his meeting with Edward. When Zara finally joined him after putting the children to bed, he knew he could no longer delay the conversation that would change everything about their understanding of their place within the royal family. Zara immediately sensed the gravity of Mike's mood and settled beside him with the concerned attention she typically reserved for serious family matters. Mike began by explaining Edward's inheritance review and the historical documents that had been discovered, trying to present the information as objectively as possible while preparing her for the more personal implications. As he described the meeting and Edward's concerns, he watched Zara's expression shift from curiosity to confusion, and finally to alarm as she began to understand the threat to their family's stability. The revelation that Mike's position within the royal family was under scrutiny hit Zara like a physical blow. She had always assumed that their marriage was beyond question, protected by her blood relationship to the royal family and Mike's years of faithful service to royal causes. The idea that palace officials could evaluate and potentially terminate Mike's association with her family seemed both absurd and terrifying, challenging everything she believed about royal family loyalty and security. Zara's initial reaction was to defend Mike vigorously, listing his many contributions to royal family life and his unwavering support for royal causes over the past decade. She reminded him of the positive media coverage their relationship had generated, the successful charitable work they had undertaken together, and the way Mike had seamlessly integrated into family gatherings and official functions. In her mind, his contributions far outweighed any minor protocol violations that palace officials might have identified. As the conversation continued, Zara began to understand the broader political context that was driving these concerns. The monarchy faced increasing pressure to justify its relevance and cost to British taxpayers, and palace officials were becoming more risk-averse about any activities or relationships that might generate negative publicity. Mike's casual approach to royal protocol, while endearing to many observers, represented the kind of unpredictability that nervous officials wanted to eliminate. During uncertain times, the discussion revealed tensions within the royal family that Zara had not previously recognized or fully understood. While she had always known that different family members held varying views about tradition and modernization, she had not realized how these philosophical differences were creating practical conflicts about family relationships and official policies. Edward's inheritance review was apparently part of a broader effort to establish clearer boundaries and expectations for royal family members and their associates. Zara found herself caught between loyalty to her husband and loyalty to her family, a position that felt impossible and unfair. She had never been forced to choose between these fundamental relationships, and the prospect of having to make such a choice filled her with anger and desperation. The idea that her marriage could be viewed as problematic by people she had known and trusted her entire life seemed like a betrayal of the most basic family bonds. The couple spent hours discussing potential responses to the situation, exploring options that might satisfy palace concerns while preserving their relationship and family life. Zara suggested that Mike could modify his media activities and adopt a more formal approach to public appearances, hoping that voluntary changes might address the specific concerns Edward had outlined. However, Mike worried that such modifications would fundamentally change his personality and authentic approach to life, potentially creating new problems while failing to address the underlying institutional concerns. As they talked through the night, both Mike and Zara began to realize that the situation was more serious and complex than either had initially understood. The historical precedents Edward had cited suggested that palace decisions about family relationships were rarely reversed once they had been made, and the institutional momentum behind these concerns seemed too powerful for individual responses to effectively counter. This realization forced them to consider more dramatic options, including the possibility that they might need to distance themselves from royal life entirely to protect their marriage and family. The next morning brought additional complications when Princess Anne called to request an urgent meeting with Zara. Anne's tone was formal and businesslike, suggesting that she was already aware of the previous day's discussions and their implications for family relationships. Zara agreed to meet with her mother that afternoon, hoping to gain a better understanding of the family's position on the developing crisis and perhaps find allies who might help resolve the situation favorably. During the meeting with Princess Anne, Zara learned that the concerns about Mike extended beyond palace officials to include several senior family members who had previously been supportive of their relationship, and explained that recent political pressures on the monarchy had made everyone more cautious about potential risks, and Mike's informal approach to royal life was increasingly seen as incompatible with the institution's need for absolute control and predictability. Princess Anne was sympathetic to Zara's position, but made it clear that family loyalty had limits when institutional survival was at stake. She suggested that Zara might need to choose between supporting Mike's continued association with the royal family and protecting her own position and that of their children within the royal hierarchy. This ultimatum, delivered with Anne's characteristic directness, forced Zara to confront the reality that even her mother's support had boundaries that she could not cross. The meeting concluded with Princess Anne advising Zara to to prepare for significant changes in their family's relationship with royal institutions, regardless of how the immediate crisis might be resolved. She emphasized that the inheritance review had revealed fundamental incompatibilities that could not be easily addressed through minor adjustments or compromises. This sobering assessment left Zara feeling isolated and uncertain about how to protect both her marriage and her family's royal heritage. That evening, as Zara shared her mother's warnings with Mike, they both realized that their situation had moved beyond the possibility of simple solutions or diplomatic compromises. The institutional forces arrayed against Mike's continued involvement in royal life were too powerful and too committed to their course of action to be easily deterred. This recognition forced them to begin planning for a future that might be very different from the life they had built together over the past decade. The formal notification arrived 3 weeks later in the form of an elegantly crafted letter bearing the official palace seal. Mike opened the envelope with trembling hands, while Zara stood beside him, both of them understanding that this document would likely determine their family's future. The letter, written in the careful diplomatic language typical of royal communications, informed Mike that his access to certain royalty privileges and functions would be suspended pending further review of his status within the family. Structured, the suspension was presented as a temporary measure designed to allow palace officials additional time to explore solutions that might address institutional concerns while preserving family relationships. However, both Mike and Zara understood that such suspensions rarely ended favorably for the suspended party, and the formal language of the notice suggested that significant changes were already being implemented behind the scenes. The letter requested that Mike refrain from attending official royal functions and avoid making public statements about royal family matters. Until the review process was completed, palace officials had clearly coordinated the timing of this notification with broader changes in royal family operations. Within days of receiving the letter, Mike noticed that his access to certain royal properties had been quietly restricted. Invitations to family events had stopped arriving entirely. Staff members who had previously treated him as a full family member began addressing him with the formal courtesy reserved for outside visitors, signaling that his status had already been fundamentally altered regardless of what the official review might conclude. The impact on their children was immediate and heartbreaking to observe. Their eldest daughter asked why Daddy could no longer accompany the family to certain events, and explaining the situation in age-appropriate terms proved nearly impossible for both Mike and Zara. The children had grown up assuming that their father's presence at royal functions was natural and permanent, and his sudden absence created confusion and anxiety that no amount of careful explanation could entirely address. Zara found herself in an increasingly difficult position as she tried to maintain her own royal responsibilities while supporting her husband through this crisis. She continued to attend official functions alone, but these appearances felt hollow and forced as she struggled to maintain appropriate public composure while dealing with private anguish. Other family members offered polite sympathy, but made it clear that they could not publicly support Mike's position without jeopardizing their own standing within the institution. The media attention surrounding Mike's absence from royal events initially focused on speculation about illness or scheduling conflicts, but persistent journalists soon began investigating more seriously. Palace officials worked to control the narrative by emphasizing Mike's continued marriage to Zara and his ongoing private relationship with the family. But these efforts only delayed rather than prevented more damaging speculation about internal royal conflicts. As weeks passed without resolution, Mike began to understand that the review process was essentially a formality designed to provide legal and public relations cover for decisions that had already been made. Palace officials continued to express hope for eventual resolution, but their tone and behavior suggested that they were actually managing a transition toward Mike's permanent removal from royal circles. This realization forced Mike to consider whether continuing to fight for reinstatement was worth the emotional cost to his family. The situation became more complicated when several royal family Members began expressing private support for Mike while maintaining public neutrality. Prince William and Catherine reached out through informal channels to express their personal regret about the developing situation. But they made it clear that they could not challenge the palace's institutional decision without risking their own positions. These private expressions of support, while personally meaningful, underscored Mike's isolation within the formal royal structure. Princess Anne's position became particularly painful for Zara, as her mother struggled to balance institutional loyalty with family affection. Anne continued to maintain personal relationships with Mike and included him in private family gatherings, but she could not protect him from the broader institutional forces that had targeted his royal association. This limitation of even Princess Anne's influence demonstrated the extent to which palace bureaucracy had assumed control over family relationship decisions. The financial implications of Mike's changing status became apparent when certain allowances and privileges that had supported their lifestyle were quietly discontinued. While Mike and Zara were financially secure due to their independent careers, the loss of royal support systems affected their ability to maintain certain properties and staff arrangements that had become integral to their family life. These practical consequences forced them to make difficult decisions about their future living arrangements and lifestyle choices. Public opinion about Mike's situation remained divided, with some observers supporting palace efforts to maintain royal dignity, while others criticized the treatment of a man who had served the family faithfully for over a decade. This public debate created additional pressure on both Mike and Zara as they tried to navigate their private crisis while managing their public image and protecting their children from negative attention. The stress of the situation began to affect Mike's physical and mental health as he struggled with the loss of identity and purpose that had defined much of his adult life. His role as a royal family member had become central to his sense of self, and the removal of that role left him feeling displaced and uncertain about his future direction. Zara watched with growing concern as her husband grappled with depression and anxiety that threatened to undermine his ability to function as a father and partner. As the official review process dragged on without meaningful progress, Mike began to consider whether accepting permanent separation from royal life might be the healthiest option for his family. This consideration forced him to confront difficult questions about his priorities and his willingness to continue fighting a battle that seemed increasingly unwinnable. The prospect of voluntary withdrawal from royal association offered a potential path toward emotional healing, but it also represented a fundamental defeat that challenged his sense of loyalty and persistence. The couple's relationship faced unprecedented strain as they struggled to maintain unity while dealing with external pressures that neither had anticipated or prepared for when they married. Their different relationships to royal life created tensions about how to respond to the crisis, with Zara feeling torn between supporting her husband and preserving her own royal heritage for their children's benefit. 6 months after the initial notification, Mike received a second official letter that effectively ended any remaining hope for his reinstatement within royal circles. The document, signed by senior palace officials and endorsed by key family members, formally terminated his access to royal functions and privileges while acknowledging his continued marriage to Zara and his role as father to their children. The language was respectful but definitive, making it clear that this decision was final and not subject to further appeal or review. The letter emphasized that the decision reflected institutional needs rather than personal failings, but this diplomatic framing provided little comfort to Mike as he confronted the reality of permanent exclusion from a community that had been central to his life for over a decade. Palace officials expressed hope that he would understand the necessity of their decision and continue to support royal causes through his independent activities, but these suggestions felt hollow given the circumstances of his removal. Zara's response to the final decision surprised many family members with its strength and clarity. Rather than accepting the palace's attempts to maintain her separate royal status while excluding her husband, she announced her intention to step back from many of her own royal responsibilities in solidarity with Mike. This decision represented a significant sacrifice of privileges and opportunities that she had enjoyed since birth. But Zara felt that maintaining her marriage and family unity was more important than preserving her individual royal position. The announcement of Zara's reduced royal role created considerable controversy within both the royal family and the broader public. Some observers praised her loyalty to her husband and her willingness to prioritize family relationships over institutional obligations. Others criticized her decision as unnecessarily dramatic and potentially damaging to royal family stability during an already challenging period for the monarchy. Princess Anne's reaction to Zara's decision was complex and emotionally charged. While she respected her daughter's right to make her own choices about family priorities, Anne was disappointed by what she saw as an unnecessary escalation of the conflict. She had hoped that Zara would be able to maintain her royal position while supporting Mike through his transition to life outside royal circles. But Zara's all-or-nothing approach made such compromise impossible. The practical implications of both Mike's removal and Zara's reduced role became apparent as they restructured their daily lives and long-term plans. They decided to focus more intensively on their private business interests and independent charitable work, seeking to build a sustainable future that did not depend on royal support or recognition. This transition required significant adjustments to their lifestyle and expectations, but it also offered opportunities for greater autonomy and authentic self-expression. Their children adapted to these changes with the resilience typical of young people. Though the loss of certain royal privileges and opportunities created disappointment and confusion, Mike and Zara worked carefully to help their children understand that these changes reflected adult conflicts rather than any failures or inadequacies on their part. The family developed new traditions and activities to replace royal functions, emphasizing their independence and self-sufficiency. Public reaction to the family's situation continued to evolve as more details about the palace's decision-making process became available. Through media investigations, several journalists uncovered evidence suggesting that the inheritance review had been influenced by personal rivalries and political considerations that went beyond the official concerns about protocol and media relations. These revelations generated sympathy for Mike and Zara while raising questions about the fairness and transparency of royal family decision-making processes. The controversy surrounding Mike's removal contributed to broader discussions about the monarchy's treatment of non-royal family members and the sustainability of traditional royal marriage expectations in modern society. Some commentators argued that the palace's rigid approach to family relationships reflected outdated attitudes that undermine public support for royal institutions. Others maintained that institutional stability required clear boundaries and consistent standards that could not be compromised for individual circumstances. As the initial shock and anger of their situation faded, Mike and Zara began to discover unexpected benefits in their increased independence from royal obligations. They found more time for personal interests and family activities, and their relationship grew stronger as they faced external challenges together. Mike's mental health gradually improved as he developed new sources of purpose and identity that were not dependent on royal recognition or approval. The couple's charitable work expanded significantly as they channeled their energy into causes they cared about deeply, operating with greater freedom and flexibility than had been possible within royal constraints. Their independent approach to philanthropy allowed them to take positions on controversial issues and support innovative projects that might have been considered inappropriate for formal royal representatives. Their marriage, which had been tested severely by the crisis, emerged from the experience with renewed strength and deeper mutual understanding. Both Mike and Zara recognized that they had been forced to clarify their fundamental priorities and values in ways that ultimately strengthened their partnership. The external pressure that had threatened to destroy their relationship had instead revealed its essential resilience and compatibility. professional opportunities for both Mike and Zara expanded as they were freed from restrictions that had limited their independent activities while maintaining royal roles. Mike's media career flourished as he could speak more openly about his experiences and perspectives, while Zara's equestrian activities benefited from reduced scheduling conflicts and greater focus on performance rather than ceremonial obligations. As they established their new normal, both Mike and Zara began to view their removal from royal circles as a liberation rather than a loss. While they grieved the end of relationships and traditions that had been meaningful to them, they also embraced the opportunity to build a life that was entirely their own. The experience had taught them valuable lessons about resilience, authenticity, and the importance of staying true to their own values, even when facing institutional pressure to conform. 2 years after Mike's formal removal from royal circles, the family had successfully established a completely independent lifestyle that exceeded their initial expectations for happiness and fulfillment. Their new home, purchased without royal assistance or influence, had become a sanctuary where they could raise their children according to their own values and priorities. The property included extensive facilities for Zara's equestrian training and Mike's media production work, symbolizing their commitment to building a future. Based on their individual talents and shared goals, the children had adapted remarkably well to their changed circumstances, developing a strong sense of family identity that was independent of royal connections. They understood their unique family history and maintained respectful relationships with royal relatives. But their daily lives were shaped by normal childhood experiences rather than ceremonial obligations. This ordinary upbringing, which Mike and Zara had initially viewed as a loss, had become one of the unexpected benefits of their separation from royal life. Mike's career as a media personality and sports commentator had flourished. Beyond anything he had achieved while constrained by royal protocols, his authentic voice and willingness to share honest perspectives had made him a sought-after commentator and podcast host. The freedom to express his genuine opinions without consideration for royal sensitivities had revealed talents and insights that had been suppressed during his years as a royal family member, leading to opportunities that were both financially rewarding and personally satisfying. Zara's equestrian career had reached new heights as she focused entirely on athletic achievement, without the distractions of royal duties. Her training schedule became more intensive and strategic, leading to improved performance in international competitions. The reduced pressure to represent royal interests allowed her to compete purely for personal satisfaction and sporting excellence, rekindling her passion for riding and competition in ways that had been diminishing under the weight of ceremonial obligations. The couple's charitable work had evolved into a sophisticated operation that addressed causes they cared about deeply without regard for traditional royal preferences or political sensitivities. Their foundation focused on supporting military veterans and promoting youth sports development, areas where Mike's background and Zara's interests created genuine expertise and passion. The independence to choose their own charitable priorities had made their philanthropic work more meaningful and effective than their previous royal-sponsored activities. Relationships with royal family members had stabilized into a new pattern that acknowledged the changed circumstances while preserving personal affections where possible. Princess Anne maintained regular contact with Zara and her grandchildren, though these interactions were now entirely private and personal rather than official. Other family members had found ways to express continued friendship and support while respecting the institutional boundaries that had been established. The initial media fascination with their situation had gradually faded as the family demonstrated their commitment to their independent path and their refusal to engage in public criticism of royal institutions. Mike and Zara had consistently maintained a dignified silence about the specific details of their removal from royal circles, focusing public attention on their current activities and future plans rather than past grievances. This approach had earned them widespread respect and had helped their children avoid ongoing negative publicity. Public opinion about their situation had shifted significantly as people observed the family's successful adaptation to their new circumstances. Many commentators who had initially criticized their response to royal institutional pressure came to admire their resilience and their commitment to family unity. Above social status, their story had become an example of how individuals could maintain their integrity and happiness, even when facing powerful institutional opposition. The financial independence they had achieved through their various business ventures had exceeded their previous royal-supported lifestyle in many ways. Mike's media contracts and Zara's sporting endorsements provided steady income that was entirely under their own control, while their charitable foundation had attracted significant donor support based on its effectiveness and transparency. This economic success had validated their decision to prioritize personal autonomy over royal security. Their marriage had emerged from the crisis stronger and more authentic than ever before. With both partners having demonstrated their commitment to each other above all other considerations, the external pressure that had threatened to destroy their relationship had instead clarified their fundamental compatibility and shared values. They had learned to communicate more effectively about difficult issues and to support each other through challenges that tested their individual and collective strength. The experience had taught their children valuable lessons about loyalty, integrity, and the importance of staying true to personal values even when facing social pressure to conform. These lessons had shaped their character development in ways that Mike and Zara believed would serve them well throughout their lives. Regardless of what challenges they might face in the future, looking toward the future, the family felt optimistic about their prospects and grateful for the unexpected opportunities that had emerged from their initial crisis. They had discovered reserves of strength and resourcefulness that they might never have developed within the protected environment of royal life. The adversity they had faced together had forged family bonds that were deeper and more resilient than anything they had previously experienced. The irony of their situation was not lost on Mike and Zara as they reflected on how their removal from royal circles had ultimately enhanced, rather than diminished, their lives. While they had initially viewed the institutional pressure as a devastating attack on their family security, they came to understand that it had actually freed them to pursue their authentic interests and values without compromise. The experience had transformed them from protected royal associates into independent individuals who had proven their ability to thrive under any circumstances as they settled into their new normal. Both Mike and Zara occasionally wondered what their lives might have been like if they had remained within royal circles. But these reflections always concluded with gratitude for the path they had actually taken. Their story had become a testament to the possibility of building meaningful lives based on personal choice rather than institutional expectation, demonstrating that happiness and success could be achieved independently of traditional social hierarchies and inherited privileges.